This is a reading from the Lessons on the Epistle of St. Paul to the Romans by Maria Valtorta. June 22nd, 1950. To the Romans, chapter 9, verses 19 to 24. Many, when they feel themselves being called again onto the ways of justice, in order not to give sorrow to God, reply, and it is a blasphemous accusation, and what is he complaining about? It is he who has created us thus. He could have created us inviolable to the assaults of evil, or at least prohibit evil from assailing us. He could have made us all good, all saints. Instead, where is his unbiased measure of goodness and providence for all? He who is rich and he who is poor, he who is healthy and he who is always sick, he who is loved by relatives, by his wife, by his children, and by his friends, and he who is misunderstood, exploited, betrayed, and unloved by the same ones. He who always triumphs, and he who never does, though having all the motives, even wholly, in order to triumph. How can one expect that one who is a victim of society, of the family, of misfortunes, or of diseases, does not become rebellious, seeing that many others are not victims, but victors? And he who was created with blood boiling of wrath or of lust, should he not perhaps say, "Why have you created me thus?" It is he, God, who wants it so, and it is pointless to oppose his will, neither in good nor in evil. It is he who wills. No, it is not him. Do not fall into the heresies of certain sects, now officially fallen, but that in reality are still living in the hearts with their heretical doctrines, or of others officially in existence which, with their doctrines, cut off from the divine truth, light, and wisdom, because these sects are cut off from the mystical body, and draw their conclusions that man has not been created for heaven, but to damnation, because he was created in a way whereby sin is inevitable. It is not like this. Do not believe it if it is said to you. Do not accept it. Do not accept this thought if Satan insinuates this to you in your mind. It would be a repudiation, a disownment, desperation. You would be renouncing God, disowning his nature, his paternity, and all his attributes. You would fall into the sin of desperation by trying to save yourselves, and like dead leaves, you would let yourselves be dragged far away from the true destination, heaven. And through darkness and corruption, you would fall into the abyss. Into that abyss which is fatal fall all those who do not believe, do not hope, and who no longer love God, his certain promises, and his law. Imitate Christ. No one was tested more than he. No one knew the solitude, the incomprehensions, and the abandonments like him. From those celestial to those human, no one suffered all the sorrows. I'm not speaking only of those concerning his extreme days, ending in the sepulchre, but I am speaking of all the sorrows suffered from the moment he first opened his eyes in Bethlehem, sorrows of every kind, and always greater sorrows. However, never did he reproach the Father for this ocean of sorrows which surrounded him, and which rose with its bitter waves, rising always more to submerge him. Never did he accuse the Father. He knew that he, God, permitted this in order to exalt him later for his merits, in a measureless measure in proportion to the sufferings. He knew that evil, sorrow, and every solitude and anguish that he suffered came from the fallen man, from Adam, and from his descendants, who for having fallen would certainly have given sorrow to he who was God in human appearance, and who was so in order to make them children of God. Satan himself moved them, and he, Satan, knew it because he was aware of his immediate defeat for the restitution of the state of grace to those redeemed, and he avenged himself with his utmost hate towards the love. Imitate Christ and do not blaspheme by blaming God for your weaknesses. Has he not created you all equal? Has he not given equally to all an intellect in order to understand, a heart in order to love, a conscience in order to see good and evil, and a soul so that there can be spiritual ardor in you and possible encounters between you and God? Do you suffer? Think of who and what makes you suffer. You will see that it is man, either because he passed on his impure blood to you for having been a sinner, or because he attacked your physical integrity, or because he had envy and hate towards you, and he slandered or morally damaged you. It is man who is the cause of your sufferings. Do you feel weak in your spirit and mortified for your falls? Examine yourselves well. Was it really God who drew you to that temptation, or was it you who had placed yourselves there, or who didn't flee from your tempters? In your soul, the sin which baptism cleanses, and the foments which remain as well as for your sins, are there really such as to make you into perverse people who cannot be other than such? Of a disowned people who no longer have the likeness with the Father, nor a means of strengthening this divine likeness always more? No. Like a man who, even if he is born or becomes deformed, bestial, or monstrous, does not cease to be a man for this reason, and even if his intelligence is damaged, the soul remains alive, or susceptible of returning back to life, even if, through a physical degeneration, the man commits brutal sins, but later repents and invokes the waters of life for his dead soul. So too, and with more reason, the soul does not ever totally lose its likeness with the Father who has created her, nor does the tendency towards the good totally extinguish itself in her. The calling back to her origin and to her end. This is also the human side of man, who can will death for the soul with a spontaneous and satanic will. However, the soul, if it were free and alone, would always tend to search for God, to recreate itself in order to be with Him. Whoever spontaneously and with premeditation kills his soul almost always ends up also killing his body. Violent towards the soul, he becomes so also towards the flesh, and having repudiated the Supreme Being, the end, the faith, and the existence in him of the Spirit, he kills himself, imitating Judas. He who with premeditation kills his own soul with a mortal sin, but later repentant has the will of life and searches for regeneration and confides in the mercy, imitating Disma, not only gives back life to his soul, but, given the humiliation of the fall, he grows less in pride and grows more in humility, and therefore the sin and its same tendencies serve to keep him humble, enabling him to proceed towards perfection that can never be where there is pride, whereas to experiment the love of God, who forgives the guilty repentant, brings him to a more living love of God, and therefore towards his end. Many times, and Paul is an example, from great miseries, from the pots of clay perhaps full of the vices of lust and hate, God draws from them his chosen vessels. He is like the potter. He is the divine potter. With the same materials he makes the pots, all the pots, with the same substance, in the same way. He places the same things inside them. He gives to everyone a same mission and a same end. His thought knows those who will remain faithful to the end and to the mission, and those who won't. However, it is not he who wants them such. It is the material that either wants to remain faithful or does not want to. And divine patience endures everything. It knows how to wait. It makes of men either chosen or damned vessels, of charity or of hate, of truth or of falsehood, of chastity or of lust, the means in which to try other men in their will of salvation or of ruin, of cupidity or of love to spiritual poverty through the detachment from everything that is not of God, of rebellion or of meekness, of wrath or of a sweet cry in sorrow, of injustice or of justice, of harshness or of mercy, of triple concupiscence or of triple purity, of irascibility or of peace, of persecution towards one's brothers or of loyalty even during a persecution, in order to reward or to punish according to what the merit or demerit requires, and also in order to make his power shine by giving the kingdom to those who reply to his lights, to his invitations, to his commands, and removing it from those who by self-proclaiming themselves gods and just ones do not bend to his voices by calling his lights darkness and his prodigies Satan's suggestions. This is what Israel did towards the Lord and to his word. And God, who wanted to punish Israel, who of the divine law had by now only written the written code, but not of the Spirit, and had fallen into the perpetual sins of pride, of hard-heartedness, of rebellion, and yes, even of idolatry, by scorning the true God who had incarnated himself out of love, and killing him so that they could be gods, after having patiently endured these pots for centuries, unto whom His wrath was already descending to damn them to perdition by disowning the synagogue and his ministers from the reproachfulness of Israel, guilty of the greatest sin. He drew salvation, mercy, and eternal glory for the Gentiles. And in place of the temple and of the demolished altars, as it had been said by the prophets and by Christ, and of the old sacrifices, he reconstructed the new temple and the new altar and the new perpetual and most holy sacrifice, just as its eternal pontiff, the Christ, Son of God, is eternal and most holy. All the people were admitted and are admitted to this temple, altar, and sacrifice, because every man is created by God. He has the same origin, the same end, and the same rights of a child with the Father, who is merciful and compassionate towards all those who turn towards him.